Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Giramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of the people in my network. So these are great leads that I'll be interviewing on these books. And hopefully, the books are books that have made an impact on them, made a difference on them, who they are in their work, life, business. I think all of those lessons transfer from one area to the next. So in this series, I'll cover books in three categories. The first, well, they'll show me books and tell me about books that I haven't read. The second category is books that we've both read, whether for this particular episode, this series, or something in our past lives. And then the third category is if they're an author or a publisher and they're getting a book out to market and want to share the messaging of that book with us. For this particular episode, it's funny that it started off as a category one, a book that they were going to share with me. And then there was a last minute change on the book because indecisiveness is part of my background as well. But Jill, who is my guest, decided actually on a book that I have read, Jill, but I haven't read it in so long, and I got it so long ago. When you said last night that this is the book you wanted to cover, I went back. I'm like, oh my God, I haven't looked at that book in years. And now like the pages are like almost yellow. But I go through it and I look at my notes. I'm like, okay, wow, this, whoever read this was insightful in what they wanted to take away. Um, so I'm going to charge you with kind of reminding me what the lessons were in the book because it's been so long since I read the book, and I'll probably reread it because, as you know, like you can read it a book, day one, and then you go back day 900 or years later, and it just resonates differently. Maybe you take different things away. But before any of that, let me introduce Jill. Jill Berquist is my guest today, and a little background on who Jill is. Jill is a certified leadership and executive coach working across a variety of industries with over 20 years in international business. Jill has worked with hundreds of leaders providing in person and virtual services for one on one coaching, team coaching, executive transition, as well as training and speaking on leadership topics such as leader as coach, emotional resilience, rewiring the brain. Figures I say it as such right there. Rewiring the brain from chaos to calm, high performance teams, and unleashing your brilliance. With Jill as their trusted partner, her clients expand their influence, powerfully leading their teams, driving organizational change, and living a more purposeful life. As health, economic, and societal change is recasting leadership needs in unprecedented ways, Jill's coaching catalyzes the agility, resilience, and holistic view that leaders need to succeed today. And Jill, it's amazing. I mean, it's not this episode is obviously about the book. It's something different, but just in speaking to your bio, just what leaders are going through in the last couple of years and how a society has turned on its head in the way it looks and the way it acts and the way it reacts and the way it emotes. I can only imagine I've seen it in the people that I've worked with, but I can only imagine in the leaders that you've had, um, what that changes look like since the pandemic struck and the world has gone chaotic, I guess is for lack of a better word.
It's a good word. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. And I think what I love about us talking about this book today, and to your point, first of all, thanks for having me, John. I'm so
of
excited to
course.
be here. And, it's so funny because I was trying to think like where you and I met. And I actually think it was on a LinkedIn thread. And I think we had some mutual friends, and I would see you chiming in, and I saw you were really kind of getting into the field of coaching more and more. And I was intrigued by that. And I'm always supportive of coaches and my fellow coaches. And I think we kind of connected on some kind of like minded LinkedIn threads. So I'm so happy to be here and meet you and get into this nitty gritty today.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm.
it's interesting because I think up until now, up until this episode, I've only met maybe 4 or 5 of the people that I've interviewed. So a lot of the interviews, the majority of them have been people like yourself that I've met,
Yeah.
like you said, virtually online. You kind of get a sense for what each other's doing and you share ideas and you comment here and share. And it's amazing for me what the pandemic has done in terms of really appreciating as well as putting out there, trying to put out there
Mhm.
great content and just taking advantage of, if we're limited physically, then I think it's kind of like we had to double up on our efforts to get our value out there and learn from each other in the virtual world. So you're one of those relationships. that I'm lucky enough to consider a silver lining in this chaos of the pandemic. So thank you.
Thank you. I agree with everything you just said. Um, yeah, so I just wanna say one quick thing about you
Sure,
rereading this book,
sure.
because I wanna thank you for that too, because, just the question of what to talk about. I have so many recent books that I've read, but what came to mind were the seminal kind of early books that really kind of launched a lot of my, application and thinking when I started my business. And what I love about your, this whole circumstance kind of pushing me to look at this book again, I too had to read it again. I haven't, like, picked it up in a long time, and yet it's as relevant today, not just to my clients, we'll get into that, why it's relevant and extra relevant today, but also, to me personally, some of the concepts are, like, uber relevant in my life right now, so it's serendipitously, it's happening at a time for me, and I'll get into that when we talk about what the book's really about. But in rereading it, it's got really a lot of personal relevance to me as well.
Yeah, I mean, you sent me the email, I think it was early last night. I'm like, "Okay." I mean, what you cover, is important to me, but I saw it as you teaching me about the book, but then when you mentioned the title, I'm like, "Oh, I think I have that." Um, so we'll get into the book in a second,
Yeah,
but why
sure.
don't just so we get started, why don't you tell me a little more about the work that you do today? And then we can kind of get into how you got into that work. But I'm always curious about the people that sit down with me, what the work is they carry out, whether it's their business, side
Yeah.
business, their
Mhm.
volunteering. What is it that makes you tick in the work that you do, and
Right.
how can you express and show what that work is?
So my work is, very encapsulated with my title for the most kinda cut and dried part of it. I work a lot with senior leaders, executives. I would say, various levels of leadership, but they tend to be in the senior most ranks nowadays, many years now. And that kind of is even how I started. I started working with senior leaders. It was kind of funny working as a coach when you're in your um, early 30s working with like partners in organizations and you're kind of like how's that even happening, but to start out with how I got here with I'll try to give you the brief version. I went to school for human development, thought I was going to get into counseling, marriage and family therapy, and somewhere along graduating, and realizing I didn't have the kind of financial wherewithal to kind of go through the whole master's PhD thing that you really need to kind of make it in that career.
Mhm.
I took another relook around and decided to apply some of that people, um, connection, analysis, understanding, and development. Even though I studied human development and thought I was going to go into counseling, I pivoted, looked at business, and was able to make a nice pivot into hiring, talent attraction, retention, and interviewing, even like trying to understand how people are, made and tick, like you said. It was all very grounded in the psychology and human development that I studied. It was just applied to a business context. And so very quickly, that was my lane. I got into HR more from a talent perspective. I was not a generalist. And I worked in an agency setting for 3 years. And then I worked for 10 years at Accenture in hiring, um, basically recruiting and retention, all these creative ways to help the people that I was hiring stay. And even though it's not a model where they stay, as you know, it's a very up or out model, so they don't necessarily stay. But
Yeah.
it was a great training ground for me, and it's a wonderful firm still today. But at some point toward the end of my 10 years, I was getting kind of stuck. I was personally getting stuck. I was helping other people with their springboards and decisions informally, career wise, a lot of the time. But I was experiencing my own kind of wall, if you will, where at the time I was kind of like, yeah, I get it. I mean, 10 years later, the only way for me to advance at that point was to pull continually up and like more senior in the roles, but away from the people. When you get more senior, it was managing greater numbers of people, managing processes,
Mhm.
not as much getting to deal with the people and all the issues I love to deal with. So I was feeling a bit, okay, I've kind of played out every angle I can think of. And I needed something new and I was starting to explore stuff for myself. So I started to do my own crossroad. and I looked into only a couple things.
Mhm.
And it was way back. I'll give you kind of an interesting twist. We're talking 1990s, like late 1990s. I'm going to date myself here. And the idea of spirituality in the workplace was like a really woo woo, crazy, not many people talking about it topic, but it really resonated with me because it was the whole person thing.
Yeah.
So I looked at that avenue. I talked with a couple coaches. I got more traction on coaching pretty quickly, even though it was still kind of a newer, burgeoning field. And I dug in there. And I was also trying to start a family, is the personal note. And my family wasn't starting as quickly as I would have liked. It was my early 30s. And um, in a way, it helped me launch my business because had I started a family back then, I think a lot of my energy would have been cut off and gone that way. Having had a stall in that area for 2 to 3 years, I needed that change. And I
Mhm.
got into my business of coaching even while I was still at the firm. So I
Yeah.
got started in it while I was still at Accenture.
So what was it I always talk about what my guests are doing now, what they're up to, what makes them tick. So going back even before that, what do you think it was that led you down that path or introduced you to that path or got you on that path of human development? What was it that sparked your
That's a good
curiosity?
question.
Whether it's maybe a random course that you took in your undergrad, whether
Oh,
it's
no. Oh,
somebody
no.
you may have had in your
There's no randomness to
you
people that
know
get into psychology and human development. I
whether
think
whether it's like, somebody in your family or even if it was innate, just the way that you would watch other people or take the world in, when
mhm.
was it that you first kind of got that itch to go in that direction?
Such a great question. So I'm gonna try not to be, snarky about this. I'm gonna be dead on serious about this. I think when you talk to a lot of people that get into counseling and helper professions, which is really where I thought I was headed, if you may not know it at the time, but a lot of it comes from your upbringing. And it wasn't that I had somebody I was modeling. I was what I would say in a kind of chaotic family growing up. And my role in the family was kind of the peacemaker, mediator, problem solver,
Mhm.
people problem solver, seeing the conflicts and the complexity at a very young age. And it kind of just piqued my interest and curiosity. Um, I didn't kind of think, oh, I want to fix the world, change the world from fixing people, but it really just piqued my curiosity. I was always fascinated with personality, people, later on neuroscience and the brain. But back when I was studying human development, it was definitely dynamics of conversation, the system, the family system, and just things that I kind of grew up with, I think. And that's kind of where it started for me, for sure.
Awesome. So, I guess we spoke enough about the book without actually referencing which book it is,
Yes,
and that's my fault, but can you introduce what the book that you wanna cover today? And
I
and
can.
and
I
once you do, I'll show
absolutely
you I do have the copy and I do have the
I know
notes
you
in it.
do, and I actually have that hard copy somewhere too. I didn't
Okay.
I didn't find myself digging it up, but because I've referred it to people in the past, I had a paperback on hand too.
Okay.
So it's The Powerful Engagement by Jim Lauer and Tony Schwartz. The subtitle I think is pretty important too. Managing energy, not time, is the key to high performance and personal renewal. So just a quick
Proof. Look,
thing,
proof.
I know. I give you
All
creds
right.
for that. You got it. You got it. So it came out really 2003, something like that.
Yep.
And I had started coaching in literally like 1998, 99. So it was really just a few years into me kind of grabbing my arms around this concept of what I was doing for building this business and what coaching really was. And I know, John, you're like this. You get kind of like voraciously curious and interested in just grabbing like a sponge onto things that you think are going to help you. I know you're like that because you wouldn't be doing this book leads if you weren't.
Yeah,
So
guilty.
this was one of those things. And what really intrigued me about it in back then was because I think that's kind of maybe your next question. We can certainly get more into what the book tells us, but um, first of all, it's written by experts. Who doesn't love a book that's written by experts in their field? Jim Lauer was at the time an expert in the performance field of athletics, but also
Mhm.
the corporate athlete. He had parlayed his knowledge about athletic performance and what it takes to be like a champion to the champion corporate leader. But he didn't start there. He was an expert really from the roots of athletic performance, and that was kind of his brain trust. He partners with Tony Schwartz here, who's an expert in leadership and energy. And at the time, he even already had his company, The Energy Project, which was a consulting firm that took the concept of energy for performance and full engagement
Mhm.
and took it into organizations to analyze a culture, the leaders. So he even had that company going. They paired up. They were experts. It was very intriguing to me, their concepts. But also, I loved that it was there's a science to it, so there was some grounded research in it. They were really good experts that had the case studies to back up what they were doing, and it was this combination of really hard practical coaching like you would be if you were like a football coach or you were a tennis coach, which Jim actually coached a lot of tennis players, and yet married with a lot of spiritual components. So it was like perfect for me because I have that practical, rational side, but I've always married it with the purpose, spiritual, and bigger picture side.
Mhm.
If you had asked me in the late 90s, I didn't have a brand yet, but if you had asked me what kind of coaching do you really want to be doing, like back when I first started, I never knew how to really articulate it in the beginning, John, but sometimes it would be saying something like, I really want to cover the big issues. I really want to cover the big questions and dig deep on the big questions. And to me, that was like people finding out like how they really make the greatest contribution, impact, how their life can be more fulfilling, how they can live their purpose. They were really the questions that I wanted to answer. So there's so much more that I like about the book, how it's laid out. But that was why it was really intriguing to me at first.
See, now I gotta go back and reread it. Just
You
because
do.
like I said, if you pick up a book and you read it through one lens, you take away certain things from that lens, you make certain notes, certain things jump out. Um, I don't know. I don't know if I bought this book. It was definitely over a decade ago, so it may have been
Mhm,
in the 2000s that I got the book.
mhm.
Um, and it may have been, it's the funny thing, like it may have been that I got it because the title stuck out to me. I'm like, okay, engaging people. Like, okay, how do I do this? But now I come at it with some knowledge about that, my own experience, not to their level, not to the scientific level, but you bring a new lens to it. So, and it's
Oh, and
interesting
there's
that,
more we're going to get into. I think you're going to be even more intrigued.
yeah, exactly. So, and then you mentioned when you were looking at coaching, or if somebody had asked you back then, what do you want to go into, and you talk about the big stuff,
Mhm.
So I tend to think in that same way, and so it's interesting that this kind of helped that. So now I
Yeah.
definitely got to go back and read it. And it kind of reminds me, I don't know if you've read the book Relentless by Tim Grover.
No, actually, I haven't, but that would definitely be of interest to me. I'm marking that down.
Yeah, Relentless by Tim Grover, and it's on my other bookshelf. That's why I'm kind of looking around. But in any
Yeah.
case, you reminded me because he is a sports coach.
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated by the way that they tie those parallels between the athleticism of an actual
Mhm.
athlete, and just how you have to train your mentality, your emotion, your spirit for the work of anything you have to do. So I think you would find that interesting. I guess his biggest client was Kobe Bryant. So there's a lot of great examples of Kobe's challenges, Kobe's frustration, how much of a perfectionist he was.
Yeah.
It's a fiery book that I think you would find
Thanks. I
interesting.
definitely made note of that.
Let me know if you get around to that. I'd love
I
to hear your
will.
thoughts.
I
Definitely.
will. And actually, I don't know, if you remember Yvonne Lendl, the tennis player, but that was a big name that, for example, Jim Lauer, he coached among many other big name, athletes. There was another one, before we kinda get into this one, we could go down many tangents.
Yeah, exactly.
But the one I was just thinking of that's very relatable to the way the mind works and athleticism is, if you've ever read Tim Gallwey's books, the Inner Game books.
No.
Oh, you really would enjoy it. He, I think, started with the Inner Game of golf or tennis, and then he did
Okay.
the other. I don't know which one he started with, but I saw him present at my first ever coach conference, and it was fascinating. He showed video of people he was teaching to play tennis that were just run-of-the-mill people off the street that had no athleticism, no barely any coordination, and I'll just give you the bottom line was, that he taught from a method of bounce hit and canceling out external noise, just like these are canceling out my noise. The idea of focus and in the moment attention, and he taught these people within a matter of minutes how to have a volley over the net who never played tennis before in their lives,
Mhm.
and he applied that and became he's a very renowned leadership coach as well, Tim Galway, and
Okay.
people learn from him for the sports of golf, tennis, whatever. But he's been a leadership coach for some time, so he's another really good one. Any inner game book you would really love.
Yeah, I don't know how that book crossed my path. It may have been Uncle Jeff at Amazon saying, "Oh, this sounds like something that John would be interested." Just when you need something is when it happens to be introduced to you by Amazon. But yeah, I highly recommend that book, and I'll definitely take a look into the books you just suggested.
Okay, great, excellent.
So, with my poor memory, can you give me an overview of how the book is broken out? Just, I guess,
Yeah,
the trajectory of how it may
sure.
start. We don't have to go in too deep, but just to get an idea of that path that the
Yeah,
book takes you on.
yes. Um, so I kind of made notes kind of where it's going, but I noticed that what they do is well, the concept of the book, just to give you, I need to give you like a thumbnail of the
Sure.
overarching, and then I'll break it out for you if that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, of
So
course.
the concept of the book is beyond this idea of energy management. It's all about energy management, not time management, which is great for me too, because I'm not a time management coach. I don't know about you, but I don't get jazzed by talking with people about their perfect time management habits or that kind of thing. It's not about time as much for me. And it wasn't for them when they wrote this book. It's about energy management and the idea of looking at the energy, they call it like an energy audit in all the areas of your life. So the holistic view, which is also resonant. And from the standpoint of physical, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual, which a lot of people have picked up over the years. Now is no new news, taking a whole person approach and looking at all those spheres. And, coaches do the life wheel and they kind of say, where's your energy going? Which, I very much subscribe to even in my intake packet with my clients. I don't know if you do something to kind of look at those things for people,
Yep.
but they really lay up a real interesting um, stress and recovery model that they found works with athletes for high performance, where you gain capacity in all areas of your life, in all those spheres, and overall, all those spheres work synergistically to make you a higher performer, high engagement, or what they're calling full engagement if you're maximizing all those areas by building capacity. So the capacity model for them has to do with stretching your muscle. So pushing yourself to the brink and then pulling back in periods of recovery is the major premise throughout the book. And I can go into more about how that shows up in each sphere or how it shows up with my clients. And maybe you can share stories too. But I found that fascinating. And that's why I'm so happy I'm going back to read the book because it's showing up perfectly for me as I hit the new year. I did my own end of year reflection and I even brought my visual because I ended up before this book thing doing
Okay.
my 4 quadrants this year for 2022, physical, spiritual, emotional, which I have as connecting with my people,
Mhm.
intellectual, which is the brain, because I need a reset in all these areas of where I do want to like push in more. But their main premise is too much of something or too little of something is not the ticket. It's somewhere in the middle. And unless we push ourselves, this would definitely be the athletic coach premise, but like you build a muscle,
Yeah.
unless you have pain and push the muscle and then recover, you can't continue to subsist with what you're facing stress, challenge, growth. And that's the only way you can be fully engaged and grow. So there's a couple key principles, but that's the main premise. And then they go on, the book's laid out Did you have any questions about that before I just tell you the way they lay it up?
No, I love that because it's a concept that you talk about, I mean, just in general.
Mhm.
There are conversations about, stepping outside of your comfort zone, why that's important. I just recorded a podcast with a friend on the importance of obstacles. So you
Yeah.
read that type of foundational thought that you just shared, but depending on who's talking about it, you use different language. But
Yes.
since they're
Yeah.
using that sports language, I find it fascinating to go back to thinking about it that way, that you're stretching a muscle, but if you keep stretching, if you don't stretch far enough, you're not going to make any progress. But if you stretch it and overextend it without that rest period, you're going to burn out and then you're going to lose any gains that you've made. So I just find it fascinating that you can have the same kind of conversation about finding your limits, exceeding your limits, but depending on what language you use, you then have a different plan of how to attack it, how to think about it. And I think if people looked at, just in general, I know I've kind of looked at it with the people that I've worked with. I think if more people looked at it that way in any
Mhm.
kind of obstacle outside of sports, but I think anytime they're met with any kind of tension, actually, I think I just posted it today, the one on obstacles. I think a lot of us, anytime we're met with any kind of resistance, tension, pressure, um, it's something that we're not used to, and that's where we find that discomfort, but something like this can help someone push through.
Right, it's so true, and I found a quote, I'll have to find it for you while we're talking, where they talk about that. It's kinda like, resist the pain point at your own peril is really kind of the underpinning of whatever that quote was, and, that it's in that crucible moment, I think we all learn it through different ways, like you said, John, but that it's pushing through the pain that is the teacher on the other side. And funny enough, I was listening to another podcast this morning. I was listening to Brene Brown's recent one with Dan Pink on the power of regret, his latest book.
Yeah.
Dan
Yep.
Pink, love Dan Pink. I love him. And of course, I love Brene Brown. So the pairing up the two of them was like gold. I'm listening to that before I even got out of my bed this morning. And they're so funny because they're both researchers and writers. And they're like, oh my God, we're geeking out. We're probably like making everybody laugh. But more than that, the point that we're talking about was at the end, they were talking about how regret is one of the most painful emotions. And, Brene is like emotion researcher. And the reason Dan Pink took that on, it's for a whole other podcast, but I'm gonna bottom line it for you because it's
Yeah.
related. He took it on because he did think that it's one of the most misunderstood emotions that people wrestle with, regret. He did a huge research study around it, huge, and then he made it global. So it's very, very interesting. But what they both landed with after this hour podcast was how regret is really a great teacher. And if you really face it and face why you are, it's usually watered down to regret of taking a chance or regret of not being kind enough. So, like fear or kindness is kind of some version of the theme that everybody regretted, whether it was you didn't study abroad because you were afraid of travel and you always wish you would have gone and studied, or whether you wish you would have asked that person out on a date, but you were too afraid, and they talked about all the commonalities of regret, but to the point, it was about the difficulty of these difficult emotions, just like this difficulty, they speak to the pain in this book. Um, it's the chance to be the biggest teacher, changer, change
Yeah.
agent.
And the thing with regret is that's one of those, emotions or reactions where when you think about it 5, 10 years later, it hits you as if it just happened. Whether your thought is, "Why did I do that?" or "Why didn't I do that?" or "Why did I say that?" or "Why didn't
It
I
sticks
say
with
this?"
you. It sticks with you.
It's I think it's like one of the rare emotions where you can think about it 5 to 10 years down the line, and it just sticks with you like no other.
I think it is. I think it is, and I think by nature of the definition of regret is it's still something
Yeah,
that
yeah.
you are, wishing had been different.
But it's amazing how visceral that feeling is.
It
It's
is.
it's amazing.
I wanna interview you, John. You seem like you've got something you regret that I wanna find out more about, but maybe that's for another time.
Oh, yeah. Tons.
Tons, I know. We're
That's
human.
life. I mean, life is it's a shit show. It's a shit
Yeah.
show, and, I again, another conversation that has to do with something completely different, but ties into this, where it's a shit show, and I've been working with somebody to kinda set up programming for students because
Mhm.
they've been saying, we tend to bring in alumni who have achieved this, or alumni who have made it to that, or what the perfect career their career trajectory has been. But we don't show them the other side of it. And I said, "Yeah, and that's an issue because nothing against education. I've gone back to school enough where I love education, but at the same time, we don't have any kind of any education that prepares a kid at that point, a youngster,
Yeah.
whatever you want to call them,
Mhm.
to deal with those kind of emotions. We go through, we read about it as adults, and we say, "Yeah, it was an obstacle. I dealt with it. It was a pain in the ass. It was heartbreak. It was bad. It
Yeah.
was this. It was that."
Right.
But it got me to where I am today. So I don't have this list of 100 regrets that it looked like my face was showing like I had this list of
Oh, no,
regrets,
I
but
was kinda I'm just teasing you.
yeah, but
Mhm.
everybody has these things that
Oh,
they've
yeah.
overcome or they miss or they,
Absolutely.
regret, obviously, but it's funny how we go through it, and that's life, and it makes us who we are. If I didn't have some of those regrets, if I did take certain actions or didn't take certain actions, but that I regret those, I may not there's a ripple effect, and I
There's
may not
totally
be
ripple
sitting
effect.
here.
It's like sliding doors, the movie Sliding Doors where you
Yeah,
go one way, this happens. You chose differently,
absolutely, absolutely. I
that
never
happens.
saw that movie, but I know the premise of what it is.
Oh, it's a good movie.
It's absolutely that way, where if
It's
I
totally
if
that.
I could sit there and regret something, but say I was able to go back and undo it, change it,
It's
maybe I
all f I
wouldn't be
guess it's the
sitting
adage,
here.
it's all for a reason. Everything happens for a reason.
And that's the thing, I
I
always
do
say
believe
that.
that.
I do believe that, and I say, like, a lot of my lessons for students is, like, a lot of stuff that's cliche, but to me, it's cliche if you say it and leave it at that.
Mhm.
So I want you to tell me the cliche, let's get the wording over with, but then I want you to tell me why. What's your experience? What did
Right.
you draw from that? In any case, let's file that under yet another episode to record. But great points, Jill. Yeah, so what else about the book? What
So
else did
about
you
the
take
book,
away or
so interestingly, this is very related to what we're saying, and I'll just
Mhm.
kinda, like, top line for you how it's cast out.
Sure, sure.
Um, it's very accessible to a reader from a reader's standpoint because and another reason I like it is because, first of all, the chapters are they make a lot of sense. They're kind of a simplistic outline of their points. They summarize with key points. They call out a lot of case studies, which I love because it brings, like you said, all the philosophies and models or whatever to life. And I can relate to their clients and the issues they were helping their clients with. So it starts out with just what we're talking about. It starts out with pain points. It starts out with like death by overwork and burnout. And how could that not be as relevant today as it was in the early 2000s? I mean, we are in an epidemic of burnout right now. It just like I don't have to tell you. I'm sure your clients are talking about it more than ever. Mine are talking about it, even if they're not. We talk about it.
Yeah.
So they start with the premise of the pain point of overwork because this is an energy book, and how do you capture the right balance of stress and recovery? So they start out by that. They introduce a couple key concepts and then they take you through each sphere. So they take you through physical, you know, emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. They land on spiritual, which to them is not religious spiritual. To them, it's purpose, which I highly resonate with. I always have in all of my work from the beginning. Um, Back in the day, I had a blog called People with Purpose, like in around 2010, and I interviewed people just like you. Before the podcast era, I had like these videos, I mean, audios, and I would post them up like you with a
Mhm.
summary, but it was all about purpose. So I love that they land on purpose as their spiritual sector because they do believe in the premise, you need your why, for whatever it's you're doing in work, in your career, in your project, and whatever. But one of the main things that's different for me about this whole idea of whole person and the concepts that they raise is this theory of stress and recovery. Because even now, I think you can talk to people who are so traumatized by stress, and
Mhm.
and literally they may have PTSD about something,
Yeah.
and they're triggered, popular word today, that we put stress in the bucket of negativity often, and this book turns that on its head, and it puts it in, like, you have to have healthy stress. We need stress to grow. We need stress to burn, to exercise and build that muscle, like we talked about. So they talk about the right amount of stress and yet recovery, whether that's a week of intense working on a project and then you need recovery because you're going to, mental and physical recovery, whether that's training for the marathon and then you need recovery. Excuse me. But in their version, um, they use this terminology oscillation. So the
Yep.
oscillation is the push and recovery and the push and recovery. It's not linear. It's a swinging motion all the time. And they give like their adages for the perfect amount of that. So physically, for focus, they would say like don't sit and look at your work for more than 90 minutes at a time without getting up and walking around. Nowadays, people will say just because we are in this sedentary society, 30 minutes, get up and walk around.
Mhm.
But back in their premise, it was like a 90-minute. You know how when you do a training, John, sometimes you're thinking of that. When is the break? When's the perfect break for the students in the
Yeah.
training? And you would probably never go more than an hour, hour and a half without giving them a stretch or a break. Just
Yeah.
sheer focus, physical, right?
I mean, just that focus, if you think about, aside from working with the clients, I don't know what kind of work you may do on the side, if you're doing any writing or anything like that, but anything where it's just you and you're not with a client and you're doing work or trying to get things done where you're whether you're typing out client notes or whatever it may be, sometimes it you may hit a wall where you can't concentrate anymore, so
Mhm.
you have to leave it for a little bit, and sometimes
Oh,
I don't even
totally.
take a quick break, but I kinda say, "Okay, I'll pick up here tomorrow." And when you
Totally.
come back, you're just even in those 24 hours, you could be a different person. You can have a different perspective. You've freshened up your mind. You've, stepped away, so there's a power of just stepping away, and again, it's that oscillation, it's that
It is the
pushing
oscillation,
and
which I
and
loved
and the
about that
recovery.
principle. I was like, oscillation. I wanted to rebel in the beginning of reading about the stress piece because I was all about helping my clients who were very type A. They still are very type A, most of my clients. But but part of why they're high performing is because they push themselves. What I mean, I can't tell you how many people over the years put me to shame with their athleticism or that they're running triathlons, and then they're also there for all their kids at every meet, and they try to do it all. And nobody can do it all. So I'm happy that they're working with me because we kind of figure that out. But the premise in the book about oscillation, I really appreciated. What's the right amount of physical stress? What's the right amount of emotional stress? Um, if you're all about, for example, one of the things they talk about in emotional stress is the concept of grieving and how overwhelming the emotional level of grief is,
Yeah.
that there's only so much someone can do at a time, that it's best to be done in waves. I mean, they said that grieving is such an intense emotion in the emotional realm. They kind of stated, that needs to be done in waves. Like people can't even take that on. Yet other things, like other really vulnerable ones, like we've talked about, probably could take on a little bit more. But, emotionally, how much connection, when you first meet a client, you're probably very aware of this. If they're flooding you with a lot of personal information in the very beginning,
Mhm.
that may end up even being something that you coach them on, because there's
Mm.
there's a lot of clients that I've had through the years like that, where they're so ready to tell you all their stories. They may reveal a lot of stories. Like they may reveal very intimate stories and very personal stories. And then all of a sudden you're like, is it that I built such a good trust bond with you in the first conversation, or are you doing this other places? And maybe
Well,
this should show up in our coaching.
it's amazing how often that happens, because I think in most cases, this is the first avenue that people have had where somebody can listen.
And I do respect that. And I actually am pleased with that as a coach.
Yeah.
I really am. I mean, I'm talking about where it's
Oh, yeah,
really
yeah,
over
yeah,
the top,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
really over
No,
the top.
yeah.
But I just had a client that said to me, well, I don't know, I'm going to be getting into stuff with you. And I feel like even as I answered your form, I'm now telling you things that I don't really talk about to my wife, and I don't know how I feel about that, and I was like, "I get it." I have a lot of clients who don't tell their spouse the things that they tell me, and they have to decide how they want the coaching arrangement to be.
Yes.
You will get the most out of it when I, as an objective party, do get into many things with you. But,
Yeah.
yeah, no, I hear you completely.
And where was it? Oh, the oscillation. And oscillating is always an interesting word. Even when I was a kid, I was just like, what is this word?" Right? You'd see it on a fan.
I just think of a fan. I know,
I
that's all I think
That's
of.
the only, yeah, I mean, what other area, I may be dense, but that's the first one that comes to mind. But
Mhm.
I like the thought, even though I know what oscillating means, where it's the back and forth motion, right? I do like the metaphor of looking at it as an oscillating fan, because that the motor, the fan itself is still moving. Granted, we
Mhm.
don't want it moving at the same speed the entire time it's doing that, but it's not to say that you're going forward and completely stopping. No, you're just kind of paring it back a little. So you're not completely stopping. It's not a full rest all the time. You're
Right.
still going, but it's like stepping away from what it is, getting re-energized and coming back. So I like that metaphor of the fan. Even again, even though I know what oscillating means and it's not the
No,
fan
it's great, and
itself,
I
but
mean, I totally love that you said that because that is exactly what it is, and I'll just read to you how they talk about it,
sure,
so it puts
sure.
it into the energy terminology. Our most fundamental need as human beings is to spend and recover energy. This process is called oscillation. So they call that, just like you said, the spending and recovery. That process for them is oscillation. The opposite of oscillation, they use the word linearity because it's going to go one way. So, right, too much energy expenditure without recovery, or too much recovery
Yeah,
without expenditure, right, is not going to work either. That's like, if you were sitting on the beach, I mean, as much as I would love to be on the beach right now, if you were sitting on the beach for 3 months and you weren't
yeah,
intellectually stimulated and you weren't challenged, there'd reach a point where you'd be like, I gotta go. I gotta do something here. Like something has to, at
yeah.
least for me,
Oh,
I
yeah,
get that.
absolutely, absolutely. I'm like, as you're telling me all this, I'm like, "Oh my god, that's a great lesson. Oh my god, that's a great lesson." And then I'm like, "Wait, I have the book." Like, I'm like, "What is
John,
this?"
you're
It's
only
almost like, "What is
human.
this book she's talking about?"
John,
I
look at your bookshelf. You can't be, I know, but fortunately, it is a great lesson, and, it's so funny, like, my daughters are really into fitness. I will not say that I am the category of the athlete that we are talking about. In fact, if anything, my performance pyramid,
Mhm.
if you look at all these sectors
Yeah,
over the pandemic, and I have a tendency for this anyway, but I'm big on intellect. Like I'm going to read, I'm going to learn, I'm going to gain new skills. Even of the pandemic, I got like 3 certifications. I like love it. I'm not bragging. I'm actually telling you my leanings go like
oh, yeah, yeah,
skew.
of course. No, I get it.
And then emotionally, I'm very, on the emotional realm, it's fine. Spiritually, I'm all into thinking about journaling and thinking about the why, and I'm like all there. The physical for me, I like fell way off the wagon over and I wasn't doing my Zoom exercise routines. I'm not somebody who gets easily motivated on my own.
Mhm.
So I faced 2022 with this like smack in the face of like not enough oscillation on the forward expenditure of pain, Like I need to really stress that physical realm. So it's in there. I mean, the others I got to keep going because but I have no, I doubt that I will. But the physical realm for me is definitely showing up. I just want to loop back around to my daughters. They are really into a lot of heavy weights and a lot of heavy squat bar and heavy, heavy. And it's so funny because they'll come home with their aches and pains. And, my husband from his years of working out when he was younger, he'll be like, you're supposed to have pain, that's part of building the muscle. And so it's just very, very explicit that when they get it in the physical realm, obviously as humans and as an 18-year-old and 22-year-old young
Mhm.
ladies, the pain they face in the other spheres is a lot
Yeah.
harder to see those lessons. They totally get it when they expend in their physical realm that they're gonna experience pain, and then it's gonna be recovery after that.
So, in looking at it that way, the way that you broke out what the book says, the graphic you just showed me of the quad,
Mhm.
the grid,
Yeah.
um, and saying yourself that the physical is the sign, that's kind of like,
That's the one that
everything
needs
everything
yeah.
else is kind of working where you feel comfortable, and that's the one that you wanna focus more on. So what does that look like for you in terms of going forward? How will you what's the best way for you to make sure that all of those are balanced going forward? And I know
So
it's a
here's the
very
other part of it.
trial and
Here's
error
um,
process, but
yeah,
what
no,
what do you think it's
I'm
gonna
gonna
look
give
like?
you a spin on this because it's another aspect of the book. Not only they talk about the theory of expend and recover, but one of the key things, and this is very applicable to the athlete's model
Mhm.
of, corporate athlete that they drew from for high engagement and performance, was the idea of rituals. So I believe that these guys were like ahead of their time because they're addressing burnout. They're talking about energy, not time. They're talking about all spheres, a holistic view of your
Mhm.
life for full engagement, way before all the other gurus talked about it. I really do feel that. And then they also talk about rituals. I mean, still relevant. Can you pick up a blog without reading about the perfect morning routine, the perfect nighttime routine, your habit for drinking water, your habit for whatever? And this is, I'm going to get to answer your question about physical for me. But one of the aspects of the book that I think I'm so happy I'm refreshing with you, John, because it's making me see why it's so important. No, really. And something I personally struggle with, I will admit, as a coach, I shouldn't be, this is like, don't tell anybody, but I'll tell you,
No one will
is
know but me.
rituals. Yes, whoever's looking at this, it's rituals and habits. I'm a great accountability partner for my clients and for anyone around me, but I continue to struggle with the long game on habits and rituals. Like I go, and then I'm like, oh, that's trailing off. So I have all the systems. I read, Neri Yal's Distraction book, another really good book, In Distraction by Neri Yal. Very interesting.
I think somebody just was there another book
Yal, Eyal.
author?
Yeah, Eyal is
Was
his
there
last
another book
name.
by that author?
He did write originally about why products sell and how that's like sticky in your brain, which is fascinating. He's on like he's a behavioral psychologist. So he talks about why we think a certain way, why products sell, why we get distracted. But he has
M
hacks for it
the
that never
last
quite
the last
worked for
interview
me.
I had, that, one of his books came up. One of his books
Yeah,
came
and his
up.
In Distraction book, I read that like a year ago. It was also during the pandemic. But the point about rituals, that's how they coached the athletes, right? There's rituals for the way you stretch, drink your water, exercise your muscles in sports, right? The way you run sprints, because it's all sprints. He wants you to live in sprints
Mhm.
in this book. They want you to live in sprints because you need to recover after sprints. Even though you want a mentality of a marathon, you need to live it in sprints that are exert, recover, exert, recover. But the ritual thing, so this goes back to me and answering your question. My latest is a new journal. No, I've tried journals before, but it's a new simplistic journal called the Monk Manual. And so far, I'm enjoying it. And I can show it to you, but it's set up really lovely. And I have a tracking system for my rituals. I'm doing more with my very simple morning and evening habits. It's going to look like me pushing my nighttime a little earlier, and then I will absolutely get up earlier. I don't know about you, but I have like this internal clock that's going to like get me up regardless of the time. If I start to go to bed earlier, I will just get up. I mean, if I go to bed by 10, I'll be up by 5. Like I can't sleep more than 7 hours. So
Yeah,
it'll
if I
just
fall if
happen.
I fall asleep at 10, I'm gonna be up at 3:30.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
exactly. It's like I
crazy.
won't even sleep till 7 or 6. But anyway, so it's kind of looking at the core tenets of my physicality. So things like sleep, I put in as a main goal how much water I'm drinking, all the usual suspects.
So is
So that's
that book for the
physical.
year, or is that like 5 years? That thing
Oh,
looked
you know
like
what
the
they're doing?
Bible.
No.
That thing
What
was
they're doing
huge.
now, no, literally, what they're doing with a lot of these journals now, and maybe it looks bigger than it is. I think it's
Okay,
looking bigger than it is.
okay,
It's about no more than a half an inch thickness,
okay, okay.
maybe a little more. But they're doing a lot of 90-day journals right now because they're letting you not feel defeated if you don't complete them. They want you to get a snapshot. This is one of those. They give you the monthly look. You fill in the dates so you don't feel like a loser if you skip something, right? So on a daily thing, I can just fill in the date and I can speak to my emotional side by having what I'm grateful for, what I'm looking forward to. I can speak to my, practical side for what I'm going to be accomplishing that day. And then they reflect. They use a system called Plan, Act, Reflect, the PAR system.
Mhm.
So in that, for me, physically, I'm trying to be compassionate with myself, which I think is important
Of
because when I'm
course.
really hardcore, I fall down on my goals. So I'm starting with, to answer your question, John, the goal of movement every day. And I can do that and conquer more than I can walk my dog and get nature in. I can do something more vigorous. I can do, something on the elliptical or the bike if it's bad weather. But I'm just starting with a movement goal because I
Mm.
think that, you have to see progress. And if I just, I just know myself, and I think it's human nature. If you set the bar way high on something you've been falling down on, you don't want to be defeated. Don't you sometimes just give your, so how this plays out with a client, if I give them an intake and I'm asking them to tell me where their energy is in different areas of their life with all the other intake that's much more
Mhm.
business focused, I'll say, please rate, um, the importance of these areas of your life from family, time with friends, time with community, wellness, time on career, etc., all spheres. And then next to it, please put the number of where you're spending your energy now. So, importance and actual
Yeah.
gaps. If you rate your family as a number 10, but you're putting a number 3 because you're not spending any time with them, when we have our first session, I might say something like, what really needs I'm not going to presume that I know where the attention needs to go,
Mhm.
but I will ask my client often just a simple question. What do you think needs your attention right now? And the reason for that goes back to my comment I just made. We all want the low hanging fruit. We want to see momentum. So if they can pick something that's meaningful to them and just make one, like I just spoke to this
Yeah.
client and he said, you know what, my wife and I during the pandemic, same thing as me, I guess. He said, we have let our exercising fall way off. He goes, I know the answer to your question right now. It's physical, it's exercise. So before I even got off the call with him, he wanted to commit to talking to his wife and getting a mini plan for some kind of ritual they wanted to do. I didn't like push the classic like coach questions on it.
Mhm.
And it was, I think, for him so important. He wanted to attack that sphere first. So it's applied all the time. These principles are applied all the time, with ourselves, but with clients. I mean, age old, age old. And what's really funny is this little thing. The only reason I have it in this weird PowerPoint right now is because my client asked a different client who is a leader in a financial services company, senior leader, said he got really burnt out, borderline depressed this year. And we talked about that at length. And he really wants to build that into our work. And I said, so and so, let's sketch out something. Like I know you've got your business plan and all your slides that you turn in every year for your business plan. I said, let me make you a graphic that shows something really rudimentary and you can plug in what each of those means to you, define it, and maybe set a ritual or a habit, but not all at once.
Yeah.
Just something that speaks to you. So I originally did it for a client, which is kind of ironic. And then I'm like, wow, I could use that based on what I just did. I mean, I'm ready.
Yeah, and I mean, what you just broke down reminds me of another book, Atomic Habits.
Yes. It's absolutely. Do you get his Thursday newsletter?
No, no, no.
You should.
Only
I'll send you a link. I'll
he'll
send you
send
a
me a
link. It's
link. I don't know if I'll do it only because it's one more thing that I would have to look at, although I want to. I
Well,
want
you know
to.
what? He gets a review on his newsletter. The best, the best like compact, worthwhile, word for word, easy newsletter that exists because it's really short. So I'm going to assure you, he
Okay.
does like one, two, three. Like he pulls out a quote, he pulls out probably one of his own, he pulls out something meaningful, and he makes a couple of them tweetable. And I just look forward to reading it because it's very relevant and it's quick.
How often does it come out, did you say?
It is every Thursday, but hey,
Okay.
you don't have to read it. I'm going to send it to you, John.
Okay. Yeah, do
I'll send it
that.
to you. Yeah.
Um, yeah, that's
I love
interesting
James
because,
Clear. No, he's definitely good.
um yeah, I think
So
we're just in that mode of just what's interesting about that book is that it came out, it talked about all these things that are more relevant today than they ever have been, really,
yeah.
that I can think of that, in my lifetime. And what's crazy is that they wrote that book before, like, the proliferation of what we know as social media.
Oh, was it really?
Yeah, I mean, social media really didn't take off until, like, the late 2000s.
And Atomic Habits was before that?
No, 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 I'm sorry, I'm
Oh,
talking
you're
about
back
the
to my
pow
book. I'm like,
yes,
"Wait a
I'm
minute,
back to
James
your book.
Clear James Clear is nowadays."
I'm dragging you
Oh,
all
no,
over
no,
these
I'm so
different
sorry,
books.
John. Yeah, no,
No, no, no.
that's the whole fascination, and I think they're ahead of their time, and
But it's baseline humanity where this is what we need. I think they were just working at it as, "Okay, that we see what's going on in the world. This book is timely."
they're
Um,
athletes. I mean,
and
they
they're
drew from
athletes.
the knowledge of performance.
So now there's even more need for that because we're spending more time online. We're spending more time on social media. We're spending more time maybe lamenting what we don't have in our own lives that we see in the next person's. We're
Absolutely.
spending more time not only on social media, but on like 6, 7 different accounts and platforms that we have. So it's amazing that this book was timely probably in the time it came out, but just this resurgence that you and I are creating right now
Yeah,
of this
it's
book is
timely.
just yeah, because I can relate to your client where it was like you got close to depressive feelings in the during the pandemic. It caught up with me, and I had to
Yeah.
step back instead of hard charging at whatever I was doing. I had to
Oh,
step
totally.
back and kind of
Mhm.
balance everything out. So,
What
um,
what do you mind me asking, what worked for you, John, when you were stepping back and trying to kind of recalibrate yourself during that time?
what's crazy, I was talking to another friend of mine also about this, was nothing changed. Um, I think it was more my expectations of what I was putting out and getting
Well, that's a
back.
change.
And it's nuance. There's a lot of nuance to it depending on what category you're looking at.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it had to do with doing a lot of internal work where maybe I was too focused on external, too
Oh, yeah.
focused on working with other people and forgetting about myself, what I thought was important for myself. For instance, this podcast, talking like this to people, just learning about people, sharing ideas, putting our thoughts together to publish it out there. To me, that this gives me a high. I'm in flow right now.
No, I
Um,
know, I know, I appreciate it because I am too, and after 2 years of managing the pandemic, and I'll say managing because I think that's what we've all kind of been doing, it's
yeah,
not like
yeah,
living in bliss, managing the home front, managing kids, managing work, managing your business,
all that caught
and
up with me.
being mission control and all that, and trying to still push it all out. I relate to that completely, and that's why when I did my final reset for 2022, I was like, for the untrained ear, it'll sound selfish to say this, but I think to a coach that I'm talking to and to people that have lived it, probably every parent, probably almost every leader, this idea of being selfish in the new year, for me, healthfully selfish, is what my year's about, is me first. That's what my picture's about. It's me regenerating all these things for me because I did, like you, kind of burn out on the other, on the supporting people, whether it was, and I mean, I get energy from my work, but it was whether it was clients, family, all that chaos.
Yeah,
And, and believe me, I did not juggle what a lot of people really did juggle with whatever they went
of
through.
course. Yeah, but I mean,
But
everybody has their right to
your
feel.
own lens. It's your own lens. But I mean,
Yeah,
clearly there's so many other struggles during this time and
yeah,
we can list them all. But yeah, so I'm with you. I mean, just the notion of kind of pivoting on that is I'm looking forward to it.
yeah. And it came up in a conversation, and what's crazy is like they somebody asked me like, "What has changed?" I'm like, "Nothing really." It really is. I'm still it's not that I change and I'm not giving as much to other people,
Right.
but I'm looking at it differently. Um, yeah, I couldn't tell you, Jill, in all honesty, I couldn't tell you what it is. I just stepped back and just kind of recalibrated, got
Mhm.
my bearings. And it was no longer, again, like you said, you coach somebody else, but then you kind of don't follow through sometimes with yourself. And somebody had said to me, they're like, "Well, you're a coach. Why can't you just kind of fix yourself?" I'm like, "That's not how it
Coaches
works."
need
You know,
coaches too. I
coaches need
know.
coaches too.
I rely on my peers for that. We definitely help
I
each other out.
absolutely never say that as a coach I have 100% of my shit together. I will just listen, work through, brainstorm with you. I'll listen intently, professionally, all of that. But that
Mhm.
doesn't mean that, coaches don't have their own obstacles. So it was, in short, it was just a matter of stepping back and kind of refocusing my energy. I mean, I bought this bass guitar a couple
Mhm.
months ago just to kind of
Nice.
unwind. Never played bass
Mhm.
before, just to unwind.
Oh, no,
Um,
that's so great. I love it.
yeah, yeah. So I just started doing that and just I sit down with that
So
for
you're
even
paying it,
20
but you are doing
minutes or
something different. You're doing
yeah,
something
yeah,
different.
exactly. And you take that for granted, but yeah, it's a work in progress. I can't even
It's always a
pinpoint a
work in
formula of
progress.
what it is. It's trial and error to see what benefits you across the physical, the emotional, the spiritual,
Yeah,
all those different
absolutely.
areas. So
And that whole human thing too, I have to say is, I kind of learned very early on, and I have to, remind myself, but I've learned early on that it makes you accessible, it makes you successful, whether you're a leader in an organization or whether you're a coach, that vulnerability of being human with all of your obstacles, trials, tribulations, faults, foibles is what your clients appreciate about you. They appreciate
yeah.
that you're not perfect. How stressful would that be to work with the coach that's, you know, that was my Tony Schwartz story. I was so intimidated by them. Maybe this is toward the closure of our conversation, but back in the day that I read this, I was so like pro these folks, and I got so into Tony Schwartz. I was kind of really following him, social media, whatever, because it did come soon after that. And I was like, wow, if I could only coach with them someday, like, wouldn't that be, you put it on your vision board or whatever you're
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
in your plan. And I was like, wow, I couldn't do it. If I look at the people on staff for the energy project, they're all like Ivy League, double master's degrees. They're the triathletes. They're the like in every category. They looked perfect. They looked like the consummate achievers. And I'm like, that's really not where I play. And I don't know if I'd ever be able to do that. One day I get a call from a headhunter, and she said, I'm trying to surface some coaches to introduce to the energy project. This is totally out of the blue. And, she goes, "Do you I know, I saw your profile, or I saw you online, your website, and I was wondering if you know of anybody." And I was like, yeah." And I was like, the little voice inside of me, the little gremlin's like,
Yeah, yeah,
"Don't
yeah.
do it. Don't do it. Don't do it." And I said, "Yeah, I would be interested in talking to you about that." And I could think of other names too, as we talk. They ended up interviewing me, a couple rounds of interviews, and they ended up saying they would put me on their bench. And I got really excited by that, and I was like, "I guess you don't have to put everybody on a pedestal, Jill, And or you're okay too, Jill." So anyway, long story short, he never did expand his need in the Northeast where he thought he was. So I never got to do it, but I got to say they got to say I was okay. So I appreciated that.
You'll take what you can get, right?
I'll take it.
But I mean, even just that example, you're accomplished, you know the value you bring to your clients, right? You're a coach, you know how to coach your clients to look at themselves in certain ways, consider certain things.
Mhm.
And even you were like, ah, no, 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 I'm not good enough for that bench of players up there.
Yeah.
So it's I think it was things like that that kind of brought me down thinking about where I wanted to be and I wasn't quite there. But then during this pandemic, I've really realized the power of your journey. Um,
Mhm.
it used to be about, oh, the goal, the goal, the goal. But now it's like everyday conversations that I have, I try to bring the most to just everything along the journey, the people you meet, the conversations you have. And the other thing with me is when I typically reach a goal, it doesn't taste as sweet as what I thought it was going to taste like.
Never does. It
It
never
never it
does.
never does. So I've
No.
so part of my I guess recovery has been really intentionally, proactively, genuinely, authentically enjoying like the everyday challenges, the obstacles, um, mostly for that reason that the goal, I look back, I'm like, every goal I've ever achieved never was as strong as I thought once I got there, whatever
It
that may
never
sound
is.
like,
It totally
whatever.
isn't. I mean, that's why people earning a certain amount of money, that whole adage, once you make X amount of money, it diminishes. It's always in the achievement. And then Is there more happiness after 70,000? No. Statistically,
Yeah.
no, there
Yeah.
really isn't. But that's a financial thing. But no, I hear you, John, and I really admire your, um, in the momentness because I think it's so easy to stay on the gerbil wheel. So you did something for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. It really it's I mean, to me, it comes down to I thought about it, just creativity. I don't think we tap into what we're capable of.
Mhm.
Um, we tend to work outside of ourselves, like the goals are outside of ourselves, what our need to achieve is
Totally.
outside of
Mhm.
ourselves, but rarely do we go internally and really figure out what we can create and put out there. So, yeah, I mean, it's worked. It's brought me peace of mind. It's reduced my anxiety. So, work in progress, Jill. Work in progress.
Always, always. No, I agree.
So at this point, is there anything else that you wanted to bring up or anything that I might have missed with the book? You sold me on the book that I already had, and I in which I took like copious margin notes.
Oh, you're so
So
funny.
so you resold me on a book
Yeah,
that
I
I
mean,
had.
here's the thing, here's what I do. When
So
I read a book like
funny.
this that's really thick with program and process and in the back they give you the whole pyramid and the way to like integrate it and make it work. I just take from it what pops. Like there's no way that I started implementing this lockstep with myself or a client. But there's some tenants that work for anybody, and I have many more, books that mirror, this sort of thing. But, yeah, I would just say, I guess that's my whole thing about take it for how it works and take it with a grain of salt because, nobody has time to integrate programs. I'm gonna be
Yeah.
honest. Nobody's gonna take this book and then map their life to an energy audit and then implement it. It's gonna be a very overwhelming thing, but even if you get one principle, like that oscillation thing, rest and recovery, pain is okay, stress in the right zone is good, and rituals, yeah,
Yeah.
maybe I should look at my rituals again. So, anyway,
Yeah, I'm
thank you for
looking at
having me
I'm
and
looking
letting me
at
talk about
everything.
it.
I will definitely get to that, and, yeah, well, I'll definitely, have you on again to talk about the next book. It's always tricky when I invite people on, they're like, "I don't know which book to talk about. You're putting me under too much
Oh, I
pressure."
have I have one I almost talked about, and I wanna know if you ever read, Executive Coaching with Backbone and Heart.
Mhm. Yep, yep.
That's a good one.
I read that. I have that somewhere, definitely. That one I
That's a
know for
good one.
sure. Yes, very
I
good.
have the book I referenced for you today, The Inner Game of Tennis by Tim
Okay.
Galloway. We can talk forever, but
Yeah.
I know that we can pick one some other day in the future if you want to.
Absolutely. So Jill, thank you so much for sitting down with me to talk about the power of engagement. Again, a full engagement, a book I already had and completely forgot about. But you've made it more timely than ever because of what society's going through right now. So,
Mm,
to anybody listening or watching, if there's anything that I might have missed, a question I should have asked, we took a couple tangents there, but I mean, hey, whatever strikes us in the moment.
mhm.
If you have any questions that I should have asked, just let me know and I'll forward it to Jill and she'll hopefully be kind enough. She's been
Absolutely,
amazing so far about
absolutely.
answering anything that I might have missed. So, in the meantime, to everybody watching and listening, thank you so much. And Jill, thank you again for your time.
Thank you, John.
All right. Bye.